The autumn winds whipped through Trinity, Texas, with an unusual chill for September 1875. But Sophia Landon barely noticed as she stumbled through her cabin door, collapsing against the rough-hewn table that dominated the small main room. Her skin burned with fever while her teeth chattered uncontrollably, a contradiction that somewhere in the back of her mind she knew was a dangerous sign. "Just need to rest," she murmured, her voice raspy as she pushed herself upright with trembling arms. The cabin swam before her eyes, the walls seeming to breathe in and out like a living creature. Sophia had been feeling poorly for 2 days, but this morning the illness had seized her with unrelenting force, leaving her barely able to complete her morning chores before retreating to her isolated home. At 24, Sophia had grown accustomed to fending for herself. 3 years ago, she had buried her father, her last remaining family, and taken over the small homestead nestled in a grove of oak trees 2 miles outside of Trinity. People in town called her stubborn, reclusive, or worse. She preferred to think of herself as self-sufficient. But self-sufficiency couldn't fight off the fever that now consumed her. She managed to drag herself to the bed in the corner, not bothering to remove her boots before collapsing onto the quilt her mother had stitched years before. The room tilted and whirled around her like a carnival ride she'd once seen in Dallas. "Water," she croaked, eyeing the empty pitcher on her bedside table. The well was 30 yards from the back door. It might as well have been 30 miles in her condition. Sophia closed her eyes, telling herself she would rest just a moment before making the journey for water. Sleep claimed her immediately, pulling her into feverish dreams filled with fire and ghosts. Miles away, Jackson Granger urged his horse forward, the animal's hooves kicking up dust along the trail leading north from Trinity. At 30, Jackson had spent more years in the saddle than most men twice his age, working cattle drives up and down Texas, before finally finding steady work as a ranch hand at the Circle R Ranch. Dusk was settling over the land, and he was eager to reach the line cabin where he'd been staying while checking fence lines on the ranch's northern boundary. "Come on, Rusty," he encouraged the sorrel gelding beneath him. "Few more miles and we'll both rest easy." The horse's ears flicked back toward his voice, but their steady pace didn't increase. Jackson couldn't blame the animal. They'd been riding since before dawn, and the day's work had been demanding. Rusty was as trail-weary as his rider. A drop of water hit Jackson's hand, then another struck his hat brim. He glanced up at skies that had darkened considerably in the last hour. The early autumn storm that had been threatening all day was finally making good on its promise. "Perfect," he muttered, pulling his coat tighter around his broad shoulders. Within minutes, the gentle raindrops transformed into a steady downpour. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by a low rumble of thunder. Jackson considered his options. The line cabin was still at least an hour's ride, and with the storm setting in, traveling in the dark would be slow and potentially dangerous. He recalled passing a small homestead about a half-mile back. Perhaps the owner would let him shelter in a barn until the worst passed. Turning Rusty around, he urged the horse into a trot. By the time they approached the small cabin nestled among the trees, both man and horse were thoroughly soaked. Jackson noted there was no smoke rising from the chimney despite the chill, and no lantern light shone from the windows. Still, someone had to live here. The small garden to one side was well tended, if a bit overgrown at the edges. He dismounted and led Rusty to the covered porch, tying the horse to a post where at least part of the animal would stay dry. Climbing the 2 steps to the door, Jackson knocked firmly, then waited. No response came from within. He knocked again, louder this time. "Hello, anyone home?" he called out, voice raised to be heard over the storm. Inside, Sophia stirred from her fevered sleep, certain she'd heard something. The room spun sickeningly as she tried to focus on the door. Was someone knocking, or was it just another hallucination? The fever had brought many strange visions, already her father standing in the corner, speaking words she couldn't understand. A mountain lion curled at the foot of her bed, the walls dissolving into water. Another knock, definitely real, penetrated her consciousness. Help, she tried to call, but her parched throat produced only a whisper. Gathering what little strength remained, Sophia pushed herself to a sitting position and tried again. Please. Help. Outside, Jackson pressed his ear to the door. Had he heard something? He listened intently, filtering out the sound of rain pounding on the porch roof. There it was again, a faint voice from inside. I'm coming in, he announced, trying the door handle. Finding it unlocked, he pushed the door open cautiously, one hand hovering near the revolver on his hip. Hello. I don't mean any harm, just looking for shelter from the storm. The cabin's interior was dim, lit only by the gray light filtering through the windows. As his eyes adjusted, Jackson spotted a figure on the bed, a woman, her face flushed, hair matted with sweat against her forehead. Jesus, he muttered, quickly crossing to her side. Madam, are you all right? Sophia struggled to focus on the tall figure approaching her bed. Was this another fever dream? The man seemed real enough, water dripping from his hat and coat onto her floor. Water, she managed to say, the word barely audible. Jackson touched her forehead gently, pulling his hand back at the burning heat of her skin. You're sick with fever, he stated unnecessarily. Looking around, he spotted the empty pitcher. I'll get you water, just hold on. He grabbed the pitcher and hurried outside, uncaring of the rain that soaked him further. A quick search revealed a well at the back of the cabin. He drew up a bucket of water, filled the pitcher, and rushed back inside, grabbing a clean cloth from a shelf as he passed. Kneeling beside the bed, Jackson poured water into a cup and gently lifted Sophia's head. Small sips, he instructed, holding the cup to her parched lips. Sophia drank greedily, coughing as some water went down wrong. The cool liquid was the most wonderful thing she'd ever tasted, momentarily cutting through the haze of fever. Thank you, she whispered, her eyes trying to focus on her rescuer's face. Jackson set the cup down and dipped the cloth into the pitcher, wringing it out before laying it across her forehead. What's your name, madam? Sophia. Sophia Landon, she managed, closing her eyes at the blessed relief of the cool cloth. I'm Jackson Granger. Work at the Circle R, he replied, rewetting the cloth as it quickly warmed against her skin. You've got a mighty high fever, Miss Landon. How long have you been ill? Days, she murmured. Worse today. So hot. Jackson frowned, recognizing the seriousness of her condition. He'd seen men die from fever during the war and on cattle drives. Without proper care, this woman wouldn't last the night. Miss Landon, I need to get your fever down, he explained, speaking clearly despite his concern she might not comprehend in her state. The well water's too warm. I know there's a creek nearby. I passed it riding in. The water there will be cooler. I'm going to fetch some, then be right back to help you. Sophia nodded weakly, already drifting back into the strange dreamscape the fever created. Jackson hesitated, reluctant to leave her alone but knowing he needed to act quickly. He tucked the quilt around her, stoked the dormant fire in the hearth with wood stacked nearby, then headed out into the rain once more. The storm had intensified, lightning illuminating the landscape in brilliant flashes as Jackson made his way through the trees toward the creek. He'd brought a large bucket from the cabin, which he filled with the cold creek water. The return journey was difficult, balancing the full bucket while navigating the muddy, slippery ground, but determination drove him forward. Back inside the cabin, Jackson found Sophia thrashing weakly on the bed, murmuring incoherently. He set the bucket down and quickly returned to her side. "Miss Landon." "Sophia," he called, trying to break through her delirium. Her eyes fluttered open, but he could tell she wasn't seeing him, not really. Her gaze was unfocused, looking past him at something only visible in her fevered dreams. "Papa," she whispered. "Is the herd secure? The storm?" "SHH," Jackson soothed, dipping a fresh cloth into the creek water. "Everything's all right. We need to cool you down now." He hesitated, realizing what needed to be done. Propriety dictated he should never undress an unmarried woman, but practicality demanded it. Her clothing was soaked with sweat, trapping heat against her body. With a silent apology, Jackson began unlacing her boots. "Miss Landon, I need to remove some of your outer clothes to help break your fever," he explained, hoping some part of her could understand. "I promise on my honor I mean no disrespect." Working efficiently, he removed her boots and stockings, then her outer dress, leaving her in her chemise and underskirts. Throughout the process, he maintained as much of her modesty as possible, keeping her covered with the quilt except when necessary. Once finished, he began bathing her heated skin with the cold creek water, starting with her face and neck, then moving to her arms and legs. The water in the cloth warmed quickly against her burning skin, requiring frequent dipping into the bucket. As he worked, Jackson spoke quietly, partly to reassure Sophia if she could hear him, partly to steady himself through this intimate task. "My ma used to do this for us children when fever took hold," he told her, wringing out the cloth again. "She said cool water was God's own medicine for a burning body. Lost my little sister to fever anyway when I was 12. Caroline was her name, sweetest child you ever saw." Sophia stirred, her eyes opening slightly. For a moment they seemed clearer. "I lost my brother," she whispered. "Typhoid, I was 16. Jackson nodded, relieved she was lucid enough to respond. "It's a hard thing, losing family." He placed a fresh, cool cloth on her forehead. "Rest now. I'll keep the water coming." Throughout the night, Jackson maintained his vigil, making 3 more trips to the creek despite the relentless storm. Each journey left him soaked to the bone, but he barely noticed his own discomfort, focused solely on bringing down Sophia's dangerous fever. Between creek trips, he tended the fire, keeping it just warm enough to take the damp chill from the air without overheating the cabin. He found a pot and heated water to make tea from herbs he discovered in Sophia's kitchen stores peppermint and willow bark, good for fever. When she was lucid enough, he helped her drink small sips. During her moments of clarity, Jackson learned bits and pieces about the woman he was caring for. She mentioned living alone since her father died, running the small homestead by herself, raising chickens and growing vegetables to sell in town. In her delirium, she revealed more fears of failing, of losing the land, of dying alone like her father. As dawn approached, Jackson found himself studying her face in the soft firelight. Even flushed with fever, he could see she was beautiful, with delicate features and rich chestnut hair spread across the pillow. More than that, he admired the strength evident in her circumstances, a woman alone, maintaining a homestead in territory that challenged even the hardiest men. The storm finally passed with the night, and as morning light filtered through the windows, Jackson noticed Sophia's breathing had grown more regular, her skin cooler to the touch. Her fever hadn't broken completely, but the dangerous heat had subsided. Exhausted from his night-long efforts, Jackson sank into a chair beside the bed, allowing himself to close his eyes for just a moment. Despite his intention to rest briefly, deep sleep claimed him immediately. Sophia woke to sunlight warming her face, the fog of fever finally lifting from her mind. Her body felt weak, drained, but the burning heat had subsided. Confusion settled over her as she noticed her state of undress beneath the quilt. Then the man sleeping in the chair beside her bed, a stranger with his chin dropped to his chest, hat on the floor beside him, clothes still damp. Memory filtered back slowly, desperate thirst, a knock at the door, cool water against her burning skin. The man had helped her, had fought her fever through the night. What was his name? Jackson Granger. She studied him while he slept, tall and broad-shouldered, even slumped in the chair, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's growth of beard. His hands, resting on the chair arms, were large and work-roughened. "A cowboy," he'd said, "from the Circle R." As if sensing her gaze, Jackson stirred, his eyes opening to meet hers directly. For a moment neither spoke, each assessing the other in the clear light of morning. "Your fever's down," he finally said, his voice gravelly from exhaustion. Sophia nodded, pulling the quilt tighter around her shoulders. "You stayed all night. Couldn't leave you alone with fever that high." He straightened in the chair, rolling stiff shoulders. "How do you feel?" "Weak, thirsty," she hesitated. "Alive, thanks to you." Jackson stood, stretching his tall frame before retrieving the water pitcher. "Creek water," he explained as he poured her a fresh cup. "Colder than your well, made all the difference." She took the cup with trembling hands, sipping slowly. "You went to the creek, in that storm." He shrugged as if it were nothing. "Few times. Needed to keep you cool." Sophia's eyes widened as she realized the extent of his efforts, trudging through a thunderstorm repeatedly, tending her through the night, seeing to her needs while she was helpless with fever. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Granger. You saved my life." "Jackson," he corrected gently, "and no thanks needed. Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said with certainty. "Not anyone. Not in a storm like that." A flush that had nothing to do with fever colored her cheeks as another realization struck. "Did you? I mean my clothes." Jackson looked away, his own face reddening slightly. "Had to remove your outer things to cool you properly. I was respectful as possible, madam, my word on it." Despite her embarrassment, Sophia believed him. There was an honest quality to his face, a steadiness in his gaze when he looked at her again. "I believe you," she said softly, "and I'm grateful." An awkward silence fell between them, broken when Jackson cleared his throat. "You should eat something. Build your strength. I can make you some broth if you've got the makings." "In the pantry," she directed, indicating a small door at the back of the cabin. "There's dried beef and vegetables." Jackson nodded and set about preparing a simple broth, moving around her kitchen with surprising competence. As he worked, Sophia managed to slip her dress back on under the covers, feeling more at ease once properly clothed. The aroma of the cooking broth soon filled the cabin, making Sophia realize how hungry she was. When Jackson brought her a steaming bowl, she accepted it gratefully. "You cook well for a cowboy," she observed after several spoonfuls. A slight smile curved his lips. "Learned on cattle drives." Man who can't cook sometimes doesn't eat. As Sophia ate, Jackson checked on his horse, bringing Rusty to the small corral behind the cabin where he could graze. He pumped fresh water into a trough, then gathered his saddle and gear from the porch where he'd left them. Returning inside, he found Sophia attempting to stand beside the bed, one hand braced against the wall for support. "Whoa there," he said, quickly moving to her side. "You're still weak. Should be resting." "I've imposed on you enough," she protested, even as her knees threatened to buckle. "You must have duties to attend to." Jackson gently guided her back to sitting on the bed's edge. "Nothing that can't wait. Circle R knows I was caught in the storm. They won't expect me until later today." Sophia wanted to insist she was fine, that she could manage on her own as she always had. but the weakness in her limbs betrayed the truth she wasn't ready to fend for herself yet. "I don't like being a burden," she admitted quietly. Jackson studied her for a moment. "Accepting help doesn't make you a burden, Miss Landon. Sometimes it just makes you human." Something in his gentle tone broke through the walls Sophia had carefully constructed around her heart over years of independence. Tears welled unexpectedly in her eyes. "I haven't needed anyone in a long time," she whispered. "Everyone needs someone sometime," he replied simply. Their eyes met, and Sophia felt a curious warmth that had nothing to do with fever. She looked away first, unsettled by the feeling. "You should rest more," Jackson suggested, breaking the moment. "I'll tend your chickens and see to any other chores that need doing." Too weary to argue, Sophia nodded, allowing herself to lie back against the pillows. "Thank you, Jackson." By the time she woke again, the sun was high in the sky, casting warm patches of light across her quilt. The cabin was tidier than she'd left it before falling ill, and delicious smells emanated from the stove. Jackson sat at her small table, mending what appeared to be a broken chair rung with tools from her father's old toolkit. "You fixed the chair," she noted, sitting up slowly. He glanced up, setting aside his work. "Noticed it was broken. Figured I'd make myself useful while you slept." Standing, he crossed to check her forehead with a gentle touch. "Fever's almost gone. How do you feel?" "Better," she admitted, surprised to find it true. Though weakness remained in her muscles, the fog had lifted from her mind, and the burning heat had subsided completely. "Hungry, actually." Jackson smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Good sign. I made stew. Hope you don't mind me using more of your stores." "After all you've done, you could eat every last bit of food in the pantry and I'd still be in your debt." He waved away her gratitude, ladling stew into a bowl. "No debts between neighbors." "We're neighbors?" she asked, accepting the bowl he offered. "Circle Arcticus northern pasture borders your land, so, in a manner of speaking." He returned to the table, giving her space to eat in privacy. As Sophia ate, she observed Jackson more carefully. His clothes had dried completely, though they still showed the effects of his nighttime excursions to the creek. Despite his obvious fatigue, he moved with a natural grace, his tall frame somehow fitting comfortably in her small cabin. "Tell me about yourself, Jackson Granger," she requested impulsively. "You know much about me from my fever ramblings, I expect, but I know little of you besides your name and occupation." Jackson looked momentarily surprised by her interest, then shrugged. "Not much to tell. Born in East Texas. Father ran cattle on a small spread until the war took him. Worked ranches since I was 14. Been with Circle R about 8 months now. No wife. Family." The questions escaped before Sophia could consider their propriety. "No wife," he answered easily. "Mother passed 3 years back. Got a brother in San Antonio, runs a freight business. We write sometimes." Sophia nodded, understanding the simple loneliness his words conveyed. It matched her own. "And you?" he asked. "No suitors coming to call way out here," she smiled wryly. Trinity's eligible men seem put off by a woman who plows her own fields and butchers her own livestock. "Fools, the lot of them," Jackson remarked, then looked slightly embarrassed by his own forthrightness. Sophia felt her cheeks warm, and she focused on finishing her stew. When she set the empty bowl aside, Jackson rose and came to stand beside the bed again. "You're looking better, but you should rest another day at least," he advised. "I need to report back to Circle R, but I can return tomorrow to check on you if you'd allow it." Sophia hesitated. She'd grown accustomed to her independence, to needing no one. Yet the thought of Jackson returning brought unexpected comfort. "I would appreciate that," she admitted. "But only if it's no trouble." "No trouble at all," he assured her, gathering his hat from the hook by the door. "I'll bring some supplies. The storm likely washed out parts of your garden." His thoughtfulness touched her. "Thank you, Jackson, for everything." He nodded once, settling his hat on his head. "Rest well, Sophia. I'll return tomorrow." After he left, the cabin seemed strangely empty. Sophia dozed off and on throughout the day, her strength gradually returning. By evening, she was able to move around the cabin slowly, marveling at the small improvements Jackson had made during his stay. The mended chair, chopped firewood stacked neatly by the hearth, her tools organized on their shelf. She wondered why a stranger would show such care, not just in nursing her through the fever, but in these small kindnesses afterward. Men in her experience weren't typically so considerate, especially toward a woman who had nothing to offer in return. True to his word, Jackson returned the next afternoon, his horse laden with supplies. Sophia met him at the door, dressed properly in a simple work dress, her hair braided and pinned up. "You're looking well," he observed, genuine pleasure in his voice. "Much recovered, thanks to you," she replied, stepping back to allow him entry. Jackson unloaded his saddlebags onto her table: coffee, sugar, flour, salt pork, and other staples. When Sophia protested the generosity, he shook his head firmly. "Circle R owed me supplies anyway," he explained, though she suspected this wasn't entirely true. "And I brought something else that might interest you." From a leather pouch, he withdrew several newspapers. "From Dallas and San Antonio. Thought you might like news from beyond Trinity." Sophia accepted the papers with surprise and delight. "I haven't read a newspaper in months. Thank you." Jackson smiled, clearly pleased by her reaction. "Cook at Circle R saves them for me. I like keeping up with the world beyond cattle and fence lines." This simple revelation that this cowboy enjoyed reading intrigued Sophia further. As they shared coffee at her small table, she found herself asking more about his interests, his travels, his thoughts on everything from ranching to politics. To her surprise, Jackson was well-informed and thoughtful, with opinions that reflected careful consideration rather than blind acceptance of common wisdom. He spoke of books he'd read, places he'd visited on cattle drives, people he'd encountered in his travels. In turn, Sophia shared her own thoughts and experiences, her struggles maintaining the homestead alone, her love of growing things, her occasional loneliness that she typically refused to acknowledge even to herself. As afternoon stretched toward evening, Jackson helped her with chores around the property, repairing damage from the storm and tending to tasks that had gone undone during her illness. They worked side by side easily, as if they'd done so for years rather than hours. When dusk approached, Jackson reluctantly announced he needed to return to the ranch. "I'm on night watch duty," he explained, "but I could return the day after tomorrow if you'd like. Help with that broken fence section on the north side." Sophia knew she should refuse, should insist she could manage on her own as she always had. Instead, she heard herself say, "I'd like that very much, Jackson." His visits became regular over the following weeks. Every few days, he would ride over to help with chores, share a meal, or simply sit and talk. October arrived with golden light and cooler temperatures, and Sophia found herself watching the horizon for Jackson's approach on the days he was expected. She told herself it was merely appreciation for the help, for the companionship that broke her usual solitude. But in quiet moments, she acknowledged the truth: she was developing feelings for Jackson Granger that went beyond gratitude or friendship. For his part, Jackson found excuses to visit the Landon homestead whenever his duties at Circle R allowed. The ranch foreman had begun to tease him about his sweetheart outside of town, but Jackson didn't mind. There was something about Sophia that drew him: her independence, her quiet strength, her quick mind and gentle heart that she tried to hide behind practicality. On a particularly fine October afternoon, Jackson arrived carrying a small cloth-wrapped package. Sophia greeted him warmly, having just finished baking bread that filled the cabin with its homey aroma. "Something smells wonderful," he remarked, removing his hat as he stepped inside. "Fresh bread," she replied, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. "Perfect timing, it's just cooled enough for slicing." They shared bread with butter and honey from Sophia's beehives, a simple meal that somehow felt special. Afterward, Jackson handed her the package he'd brought. "What's this?" she asked, unwrapping the cloth to reveal a book, a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson. "Ordered it from a bookseller in Dallas," he explained, suddenly appearing uncertain. "You mentioned liking poetry once. Thought you might enjoy it." Sophia ran her fingers gently over the cover, touched beyond words. No one had given her a gift in years, let alone something so perfectly suited to her interests. "It's wonderful, Jackson. Thank you." She looked up at him, not bothering to hide the emotion in her eyes. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing steadily since that stormy night when he'd cooled her fever with creek water. Jackson reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Sophia, I need to tell you something." Her heart quickened. "Yes, Circle R is sending me to San Antonio next week, escorting a herd to market. I'll be gone 3 weeks, maybe a month." Disappointment washed over her, surprising in its intensity. "Oh, I see. Before I go, I wanted to ask." He hesitated, his usual confidence faltering. "When I return, would you allow me to court you properly? With intentions that go beyond friendship?" Sophia stared at him, momentarily speechless. Of all the things she'd expected him to say, this hadn't been among them. Jackson misinterpreted her silence. "I understand if you don't feel the same. You're an independent woman with your own life, and I'm just a cowhand with little to offer except—" "Yes," she interrupted, squeezing his hand. "Yes, I would like that very much, Jackson." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the plains, warm, bright, full of promise. "I've never met anyone like you, Sophia Landon," he said quietly. "Never thought I'd find someone who makes me feel the way you do." They spent the afternoon together, making plans for his return, discussing what a courtship might look like, sharing hopes and dreams they'd previously kept to themselves. As the sun began its descent, they walked the boundaries of her property together, his hand occasionally brushing hers in a gesture that felt both innocent and thrilling. When it was time for him to leave, Jackson stood beside his horse, reluctant to mount up. "I'll try to write from San Antonio," he promised. "I'd like that," Sophia replied, standing closer to him than propriety strictly allowed. Jackson reached out, gently touching her cheek with calloused fingers. "May I kiss you before I go?" Might be improper without formal courtship, but Sophia answered by rising on tiptoe and pressing her lips softly to his. The kiss was brief but perfect, a promise of what might come when he returned. "Something to remember on the trail," she whispered as she pulled away. Jackson's eyes had darkened, his expression a mixture of surprise and pleasure. "I don't think I could forget that if I tried, Sophia." He mounted Rusty with visible reluctance. "1 month. I'll be back before you know it." Sophia stood on her porch, watching until horse and rider disappeared beyond the ridge. Only then did she allow herself to feel the full weight of how much she would miss him, and how completely this cowboy had changed her life in the span of a few short weeks. The days following Jackson's departure stretched endlessly for Sophia. She threw herself into work around the homestead, harvesting the last of her garden produce, preserving food for winter, repairing and preparing the cabin for the colder months ahead. Physical exhaustion helped her sleep at night, when thoughts of Jackson might otherwise have kept her awake. 2 weeks after he left, a letter arrived via a Circle R ranch hand who passed her property. Jackson's handwriting was surprisingly neat and even, his words thoughtful as he described the journey to San Antonio, the bustling city streets, and how much he missed the quiet conversations they shared at her table. Sophia read the letter repeatedly, carrying it in her apron pocket for days, taking it out whenever she needed reassurance that what had grown between them was real. She wrote back immediately, sending her reply with the weekly supply wagon that connected Trinity to larger towns. As the third week of Jackson's absence began, Sophia rode into Trinity for supplies. The small town consisted of little more than a main street with essential businesses: general store, blacksmith, saloon, small hotel, and a church that doubled as a schoolhouse during the week. Though she visited only when necessary, most townsfolk recognized the independent woman who lived alone on the old Landon place. At the general store, Sophia was selecting fabric for winter clothing when she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "Terrible business down San Antonio way," the storekeeper was telling another customer. "Ambush on a cattle drive coming home. 2 men killed, they say." "Which outfit?" asked the customer, a local rancher Sophia recognized. "Circle R," replied the storekeeper. "News just came in on yesterday's stage." Sophia's hands trembled so badly she dropped the bolt of fabric she'd been examining. "Excuse me," she interrupted, approaching the counter. "Did you hear which men from Circle R were killed?" The storekeeper looked surprised by her interest but answered readily enough. "Message didn't say names, madam, just that there was trouble with rustlers on the return journey. 2 hands lost, several head of cattle stolen." Sophia nodded mechanically, her mind racing with fear. What were the odds that Jackson was among those killed? The Circle R was a large operation with many hands, but they wouldn't have sent many men with a small market herd. She completed her purchases in a daze, then mounted her mare for the ride home, urging the animal faster than usual. At the homestead, Sophia paced the cabin, torn between riding immediately to Circle R headquarters for news and waiting for information to reach her. In the end, practicality won out. The Circle R main house was a half-day's ride, and she had animals to tend, and no guarantee the foreman would share information with her, a woman whose connection to their hand wasn't officially acknowledged. Sophia spent a sleepless night alternating between prayer and planning what she would do if the worst were true, how she would bear it if Jackson never returned. By morning, she had resolved to continue as she always had, one day at a time, work as the antidote to worry and grief. She was collecting eggs from her henhouse when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart leap. Stepping outside, hands shielding her eyes from the morning sun, she saw a rider approaching from the direction of Trinity, not from the north, where Circle R lay. As the rider drew closer, she recognized the town doctor, Dr. Miller, on his aging bay gelding. Her heart sank. The doctor wouldn't be bringing good news. "Miss Landon," he greeted, dismounting stiffly. At 60, the doctor was still active in his practice but showing his age. "Dr. Miller," she returned, struggling to keep her voice steady. "What brings you out this way?" "Message came for you," he explained, reaching into his coat pocket. "Stage brought it late yesterday. Postmaster asked if I'd deliver it since I was heading this direction to check on the Peterson baby." He handed her an envelope, and Sophia nearly collapsed with relief when she recognized Jackson's handwriting on the outside. "Thank you," she said fervently, clutching the letter. Dr. Miller nodded, remounting his horse. "Good day, Miss Landon. Give a shout if you need anything." Sophia barely registered his departure, already tearing open the envelope with trembling fingers. The letter was dated just 5 days earlier. "Dearest Sophia," it began, the endearment making her heart flutter despite her anxiety. "By the time you receive this, you may have heard news of trouble on our return journey. I write in haste to assure you I am unharmed, though we lost 2 good men in an ambush by cattle rustlers 2 days ago. Tom Ellis and Frank Doyle were fine cowboys and better men. Their loss weighs heavily on us all. We're delayed while the local sheriff investigates, but should resume our journey within days. The remaining herd is secure, though reduced by 20 head stolen during the attack. I find myself thinking of you constantly, especially now when faced with the fragility of life. What began as gratitude for your kindness has grown into something I never expected to find, a feeling that makes me want to be a better man, to build something lasting, to wake each morning knowing you are part of my life. Forgive my boldness in writing such thoughts, but facing danger has a way of clarifying what truly matters. And you, Sophia Landon, matter more to me than I can properly express on paper. Look for me within 2 weeks. Until then, please know you are in my every thought. Yours faithfully, Jackson. Tears of relief streamed down Sophia's face as she clutched the letter to her chest. He was alive. Whatever else happened, Jackson was alive and thinking of her, planning to return. The following days passed in a blur of activity, as Sophia channeled her renewed hope and energy into preparing for Jackson's return. She baked his favorite bread, cleaned the cabin until it gleamed, and even rode into Trinity to purchase material for a new dress, a luxury she rarely allowed herself. Working by lamplight in the evenings, she sewed a simple but pretty dress in a deep blue that complemented her eyes. As she stitched, she allowed herself to imagine a future that included Jackson Granger, shared meals and conversations, laughter and partnership, perhaps someday a family to fill the quiet spaces of her life. The 2-week mark came and went with no sign of Jackson. Sophia told herself not to worry. Travel was unpredictable, especially with cattle and the aftermath of an ambush to manage. Still, she found herself watching the horizon whenever she stepped outside, hoping to see a familiar figure on horseback approaching. On the 17th day after his letter arrived, Sophia was splitting firewood behind the cabin when she heard a horse nickering in the distance. The sound was familiar, Rusty's distinctive greeting to other horses. She dropped the axe and hurried around the cabin, heart pounding. There, silhouetted against the late afternoon sun, was Jackson astride his sorrel gelding, leading a second horse, a beautiful bay mare with a white star on her forehead. Sophia stood frozen for a moment, drinking in the sight of him, slightly thinner than when he'd left, with a new scar visible on his jawline, but wonderfully, miraculously whole and present. "Jackson," she called, her voice breaking as she began walking, then running toward him. He dismounted quickly, meeting her halfway. Without hesitation, Sophia threw herself into his arms, propriety forgotten in the joy of his safe return. Jackson's arms closed around her, lifting her briefly off her feet as he held her tightly. "Sophia," he murmured into her hair. "God, I've missed you." When he set her down, she stepped back just enough to study his face, fingers gently tracing the new scar on his jaw. "You're hurt." "Just a scratch," he assured her, capturing her hand and bringing it to his lips. "Barely worth mentioning. The rustlers?" she asked, unable to stop touching him, reassuring herself he was really there. Jackson nodded. "Caught us by surprise in a narrow pass. I was luckier than some." Sophia thought of the 2 men who hadn't returned, feeling a pang of sympathy for their families mixed with profound gratitude that Jackson wasn't among them. "I'm so sorry about your friends," she said softly. Thank you. His expression grew serious. Their passing reminded me how short life can be, how important it is to pursue what matters most. His eyes held hers intently. And what matters most to me, Sophia Landon, is you. Her breath caught at the naked emotion in his voice. Jackson. I know it's soon, he continued, still holding her hand. We've known each other barely 2 months, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. He gestured toward the bay mare standing patiently beside Rusty. I brought you a gift. Her name's Daisy. Gentlest mare in San Antonio, according to the seller. Sophia blinked in confusion, looking between Jackson and the beautiful horse. Jackson, she's lovely, but I can't accept. She's not just a gift, he interrupted gently. She's a proposal, a proposal. Jackson took a deep breath, his expression a mixture of nervousness and determination. Circle R foreman offered me a promotion while I was gone. Assistant foreman with a proper house instead of the bunkhouse. It's not much compared to what you deserve, but it's a start, a place where we could build a life together. Understanding dawned, making Sophia's heart race. Jackson Granger, are you asking me to marry you? I am. He took both her hands in his. I love you, Sophia. I think I started falling the night I cooled your fever with creek water and watched you fight to live. Everything since has only deepened those feelings. I know it's fast and maybe foolish. Yes, she interrupted, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. Yes. He repeated as if afraid he'd misheard. Yes, I'll marry you. Sophia smiled through her tears. I love you too, Jackson, more than I thought possible. The look of joy that transformed his face was something Sophia knew she would remember all her days. Jackson whooped loudly, startling both horses, then swept her into his arms again, spinning her in a circle before setting her down and kissing her properly, a kiss full of promise and passion and future. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, Jackson pressed his forehead to hers. You've made me the happiest man in Texas, Sophia Landon. They led the horses to the corral, walking hand in hand as they discussed plans a small wedding at Trinity's church before winter set in, moving her belongings to the assistant foreman's house at Circle R, what to do with her homestead. We could keep it, Jackson suggested. It's good land. Maybe rent it out for now, or use it ourselves someday if we decide ranch life isn't for us. The thoughtfulness of his suggestion that he was thinking of their future together in all its possibilities warmed Sophia's heart further. This man understood her attachment to the land, her need for security and options. I'd like that, she agreed. It's been in my family for 2 generations. Seems right to keep it, even if we're not living here. They settled on the porch as evening approached. Sophia nestled against Jackson's side as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Tell me about San Antonio, she requested. Before the trouble, I mean. Was it as exciting as you described in your letter? Jackson chuckled, his arm tightening around her shoulders. It was something, all right. Buildings taller than you'd believe, people from everywhere speaking languages I couldn't recognize. But you know what I found myself thinking while walking those busy streets? What? She asked, tilting her head to see his face. That I'd rather be sitting right here with you, watching sunset over your garden. His expression grew tender. Crowds and noise and excitement are all well and good, but they don't compare to this quiet moments with someone who matters. Sophia reached up to touch his face, wondering how she'd gotten so fortunate. From desperate fever to unexpected love, her life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. When did you know? She asked quietly. That you loved me, I mean. Jackson considered the question seriously. There wasn't one moment exactly, but I remember the morning after your fever broke when you insisted you didn't want to be a burden, even though you could barely stand. He smiled at the memory. Your strength amazed me. Not just the physical kind, but the strength of character that kept you going after losing your family, managing alone all these years. He kissed her forehead gently. What about you? When did you know about me? Sophia smiled. The poetry book. No one had ever given me something so perfectly thoughtful before. But I think my heart knew earlier, maybe the day you fixed my chair without being asked, just because you noticed it needed doing. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, planning aloud the details of their future together: the wedding in November, Christmas at Circle R, the garden they would plant in spring behind their new home. As darkness fell completely, Jackson reluctantly stood. I should get back to the ranch. Foreman's expecting my report on the San Antonio journey. Sophia rose with him, unwilling for their reunion to end but understanding his responsibilities. When will I see you again? Tomorrow, he promised. I'll speak to Reverend Thomas about the wedding date and bring the paperwork for the license. His eyes twinkled with amusement. Unless you've reconsidered and plan to leave me standing at the altar. Not a chance, Cowboy, she assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him once more. I've waited too long to find you to let you get away now. Jackson held her close for a long moment, as if memorizing the feel of her in his arms. 1 month from tonight, you'll be Mrs. Jackson Granger, he murmured against her hair. Seems like a miracle. The best kind of miracle, she agreed. The kind that comes after a storm. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. News of their engagement spread quickly through Trinity and the surrounding ranches, generating a surprising amount of goodwill and support. Though some eyebrows raised at the speed of their courtship, those who knew them best, Dr. Miller, Reverend Thomas, the Circle R hands who had witnessed Jackson's growing attachment, understood that what existed between them was genuine and deep. Sophia divided her time between preparing her homestead for temporary vacancy and readying herself for marriage. The women from church volunteered to help with her wedding preparations, bringing her into their circle in a way she had never experienced during her years of independent living. Mrs. Peterson, the dressmaker, insisted on creating Sophia's wedding dress as a gift. Every bride deserves something special, she declared, measuring Sophia in her small shop behind the general store. And it's not every day we get to celebrate a love story that began with fever and creek water. The resulting gown was simple but beautiful ivory cotton with delicate embroidery at the bodice and hem, more elegant than anything Sophia had ever owned. When she tried it on for the final fitting, Mrs. Peterson's eyes misted over. You look radiant, dear, the older woman said, adjusting the skirt. That cowboy of yours won't know what hit him. For his part, Jackson threw himself into preparing their future home at Circle R. The assistant foreman's house was small but solidly built, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a proper cookstove, and a sitting area with a stone fireplace. With permission from the ranch owner, Jackson repaired the sagging back porch, replaced cracked window panes, and built shelves for Sophia's books and housewares. Circle R hands teased him good-naturedly about his transformation from footloose cowboy to nesting bridegroom, but their ribbing held genuine affection. Many helped during their off hours, contributing skills and labor to make the house a fitting home for the new couple. The day before their wedding, Jackson and Sophia met at her homestead to finalize arrangements for its care during their absence. A reliable family from Trinity would look after the animals and garden in exchange for using the land, ensuring the property remained maintained while generating a small income. As they walked the boundaries of her land together, Sophia felt a bittersweet pang at the thought of leaving, even temporarily. This place had been her sanctuary, her responsibility, her connection to family now gone. Jackson sensed her melancholy. "We'll visit often," he promised, squeezing her hand. "It's only 5 miles from Circle R, close enough for Sunday afternoon rides." Sophia smiled up at him gratefully. "I know, and I'm excited for our new home together. It's part of you," he finished, understanding. "Your history. Your parents' legacy." She nodded, touched by his perception. "Exactly." "Then we'll honor that," Jackson said simply. "Make it part of our future, too. Maybe our children will play in these fields someday, climb these same trees." The mention of children brought a flush to Sophia's cheeks and a flutter to her heart. They had spoken in general terms about family, but hearing Jackson reference their potential children so naturally made their future together seem even more real and precious. "I'd like that," she said softly. That evening, as tradition dictated, they parted until the ceremony. Jackson would spend his last night of bachelorhood at Circle R, while Sophia remained at the homestead with Mrs. Peterson and Reverend Thomas's wife, who had volunteered to help her prepare for the wedding. Their goodbye was lingering, full of anticipation for the day to come. "Next time I see you, you'll be walking down the aisle," Jackson murmured, holding her close on the porch. "I can hardly believe it's real," Sophia admitted. "Sometimes I think I might wake up and find myself still fevered, hallucinating all of this us, everything that's happened since that storm." Jackson tilted her chin up gently. "It's real, Sophia. As real as that creek water I hauled all night, as real as my heart beating right now." His kiss was tender and full of promise, a perfect conclusion to their courtship and prelude to their marriage. The morning of November 15, 1875, dawned clear and cool, ideal weather for a wedding. Sophia woke early, too excited and nervous to sleep further. Mrs. Peterson and Mrs. Thomas arrived soon after, bringing breakfast and cheerful conversation to distract the bride as they helped her prepare. "Something old," Mrs. Thomas announced, fastening a delicate silver locket around Sophia's neck. "This was my mother's. You can return it after the ceremony, but every bride needs something old for luck." "Something new is your beautiful dress," Mrs. Peterson added, laying it carefully across the bed. "Something borrowed," Mrs. Thomas continued, presenting a lace handkerchief. "My daughter carried this at her wedding last spring in Austin." "And something blue," finished Mrs. Peterson, revealing a blue satin ribbon to tie around Sophia's bouquet of late autumn flowers gathered from her garden and supplemented with blooms from Trinity's gardens. Touched by their thoughtfulness, Sophia embraced both women. "Thank you for everything." By 10 o'clock, Sophia was dressed and ready, her chestnut hair arranged in soft curls beneath a simple veil. The women had departed ahead to the church, leaving her alone for a final moment of reflection in the cabin that had been her home for so long. She looked around at the familiar space, the table where she and Jackson had shared so many conversations, the bed where he had tended her through fever, the hearth where they had planned their future. Today marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Opening it, she found Dr. Miller waiting, dressed in his Sunday best. "Miss Landon," he greeted warmly. "You look beautiful." "Thank you, doctor," she replied, genuinely pleased to see him. He cleared his throat. "I understand your father is gone, and you have no male relatives nearby. I wondered if you might allow me the honor of escorting you to the church and giving you away." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes at the unexpected offer. Dr. Miller had treated her family for years, had been present at both her parents' deathbeds. In many ways, he was the closest thing to family she had left in Trinity. "I would be grateful," she managed, accepting his extended arm. They rode to town in Dr. Miller's buggy, the doctor maintaining a stream of cheerful conversation that calmed Sophia's nerves. As they approached Trinity, she could see the small church was fuller than usual for a Wednesday morning. It seemed the entire town had turned out for the occasion. Quite a crowd, Dr. Miller noted. Seems everyone wants to witness the union of Trinity's most independent woman and Circle Arcticus' most dedicated cowboy. Sophia laughed, her tension easing. I suppose we've given them something to talk about these past weeks. Indeed you have, he agreed, helping her down from the buggy. And what a wonderful story, it is the kind people will tell for years to come. Inside the church vestibule, Mrs. Peterson made final adjustments to Sophia's dress and veil while Mrs. Thomas peeked into the sanctuary. Full house, she reported. And your groom looks handsome as can be, if a bit nervous. Sophia smiled, imagining Jackson waiting at the altar, perhaps tugging at the collar of his best shirt. The music began, Mrs. Davis playing the small organ with enthusiastic if imperfect skill. Ready, my dear, doctor? Miller asked, offering his arm once more. Sophia took a deep breath and nodded. Ready. As they entered the sanctuary, the congregation rose. Sophia was momentarily overwhelmed by the sea of familiar faces: shopkeepers, ranchers, fellow churchgoers. Circle R hands in freshly pressed shirts, all smiling as she passed. But her eyes quickly found Jackson, standing tall beside Reverend Thomas at the altar. He wore a new black suit, his usually untamed hair neatly combed, his expression transforming from anxious to awestruck as he saw her. The walk down the aisle seemed both eternal and instantaneous. When they reached the altar, Dr. Miller placed her hand in Jackson's with a formal solemnity that made the moment feel sacred. Who gives this woman in marriage? Reverend Thomas asked. I do, on behalf of her late father, Dr. Miller replied, then stepped aside. Jackson's hand was warm and steady around hers as they turned to face the Reverend. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, with readings from Scripture about love, partnership, and building a life together. When the time came to exchange vows, Jackson's voice rang clear and confident through the church. I, Jackson Granger, take you, Sophia Landon, to be my lawfully wedded wife. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. Sophia's own voice trembled slightly with emotion as she repeated the ancient promises, binding her life to his before God and community. The rings, please, Reverend Thomas requested. Jackson had saved for months to purchase Sophia's ring, a simple gold band engraved inside with their initials and wedding date. Sophia had sold one of her mother's brooches to buy Jackson's matching band, wanting him to have a tangible symbol of her commitment. As they exchanged rings, the physical representation of their vows, Sophia was struck by the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a fever-racked night during a thunderstorm to a sunny November morning filled with promise. By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Thomas declared, beaming at the couple. Mr. Granger, you may kiss your bride. Jackson lifted Sophia's veil with gentle hands, his eyes conveying everything words could not: love, gratitude, commitment, joy. Their first kiss as husband and wife was brief but perfect, witnessed by the approving smiles of friends and neighbors. Ladies and gentlemen, Reverend Thomas announced, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Jackson Granger. The church erupted in applause as they turned to face the congregation. Hand in hand, they walked back down the aisle, stepping out of the church into the bright Texas sunshine as husband and wife. The celebration continued at Circle R, where the ranch owner had generously offered the use of the main house grounds for the wedding feast. Tables set beneath oak trees groaned with food contributed by nearly every household in Trinity: roast beef, fried chicken, cornbread, biscuits, preserves, cakes, and pies of every description. Circle R hands had constructed a wooden dance floor where fiddlers from neighboring ranches played lively tunes. Jackson and Sophia opened the dancing with a waltz, their movements graceful despite limited practice. "Happy, Mrs. Granger," Jackson murmured as he guided her across the floor. "Completely, Mr. Granger," she replied, her eyes shining, "though I'm still getting used to my new name." "You have a lifetime to practice," he reminded her, pulling her slightly closer than strict propriety allowed. As afternoon stretched into evening, they accepted congratulations, shared stories with well-wishers, and danced until their feet ached. When the sun began to set, they slipped away to their waiting buggy, decorated with ribbons and flowers by the Circle R hands. Amid cheers and good-natured teasing, Jackson helped Sophia into the vehicle and climbed up beside her. With a wave to their guests, he flicked the reins, starting their journey to the small house that would be their first home together. The assistant foreman's house was aglow with lamplight when they arrived, welcoming them home. Jackson insisted on carrying Sophia across the threshold, setting her down gently in the main room that had been transformed with flowers, candles, and a cheerful fire in the hearth, the work of Mrs. Thomas and other church women who had prepared the house while they celebrated. "Welcome home," Jackson said softly, taking her hands in his. Sophia looked around at the space they would share, his books mingling with hers on the shelves, her mother's quilt draped over a rocking chair, the curtains she had sewn hanging at the windows. It wasn't grand or fancy, but it was theirs, the beginning of the life they would build together. "It's perfect," she whispered, meaning far more than just the house. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their wedding night, Sophia rested her head on Jackson's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I keep thinking about that night you found me," she murmured. "How close I came to—" "Don't," he interrupted gently, his arms tightening around her. "You're here. We're here. That's what matters." She propped herself up on one elbow to see his face in the moonlight filtering through the window. "Do you believe in fate, Jackson?" "That some things are meant to be," he considered her question thoughtfully, his hand tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. "I don't know about fate exactly, but I do believe some storms blow through our lives for a reason, changing our course, washing away what was to make room for what might be." Sophia smiled, recognizing the poetry in his practical cowboy's soul. "Then I'm grateful for that storm," she said softly, "and for creek water. And for you, Jackson Granger." His answer was a kiss that spoke of devotion and desire, of promises kept, and a future unfolding, a perfect culmination of the journey that had begun with fever and hallucination, with a stranger's kindness and cool water in the night. In the years that followed, their love story became something of a legend in Trinity, and beyond the fever that nearly claimed a woman's life, the cowboy who fought it with creek water through the night, and the unexpected love that blossomed in its wake. Their first child, a son born exactly 9 months after their wedding, was named Thomas Creek Granger, honoring both the Reverend who married them and the water that had saved Sophia's life and brought them together. The Landon homestead remained in their care, eventually becoming a weekend retreat where their growing family, 3 sons and a daughter, learned to ride, fish, and appreciate the land that had shaped their mother's character. Jackson's position at Circle R evolved from assistant foreman to full foreman, and eventually to partner, his natural leadership and innovative ranching methods earning him respect throughout the region. Sophia never forgot the lessons of those fevered days, the importance of accepting help, of recognizing that independence and love could coexist, of understanding that sometimes the greatest strengths emerge from moments of greatest vulnerability. In turn, Jackson carried with him always the memory of that night beside Sophia's bed, learning that true courage often manifests not in dramatic gestures but in persistent care, in fetch after fetch of Cold Creek water, in refusing to surrender to circumstances that seem hopeless. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and a lifetime of accumulated friends, Jackson and Sophia returned to the creek that had played such a pivotal role in their beginning. Though both were gray and weathered by decades of Texas sun and hard work, their eyes still held the same spark when they looked at each other. "Half a century," Sophia marveled, her hand secure in his as they stood beside the flowing water. "Who would have thought it, that night when I was burning with fever and you were just a stranger in a storm?" "I knew," Jackson replied with quiet certainty. "Not consciously, perhaps, but somewhere deeper, I knew you were the one I'd been riding toward my whole life." Sophia squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar calluses that had never quite softened despite years away from daily ranch work. "Thank you for saving me," she said simply. Jackson shook his head, lifting her hand to his lips in a gesture that had never lost its tenderness. "You have it backward, my love. You saved me, too, from a life of wandering, from never knowing what it means to truly belong somewhere with someone." Together they watched the creek water flow, carrying away leaves and twigs, nourishing the land as it had for centuries before them, and would for centuries after. Like the water itself, their love had become an essential element of the landscape, sometimes quiet and steady, sometimes rushing and powerful, but always flowing forward. And in that moment, as in countless moments throughout their shared life, both felt the perfect rightness of how their stories had merged through fever and creek water, through storm and sunrise, through all the challenges and joys that had shaped their extraordinary, ordinary love.